Good afternoon, everybody. So we have a panel today talking about the future use cases of blockchain over the next decade. So I think this should be a very interesting conversation. Each one of us have a lot of experience building blockchain platforms and other technologies. So I think what we're going to do is give introductions, who we are, why we're here, and what excites us about blockchain, where we see things in the future. So I'll pass it down at the end, and we'll go right across.
Okay, thank you, and welcome here. My name is Jouko Ahvenainen, and I'm from Grow VC Group, and we are basically investing and holding company in fintech area, so that we have totally 10 companies globally that are operating in the fintech, and nowadays also offer some services on a blockchain. And our focus is especially, for example, the back office services and also data services. So that I think that what I'm going to emphasize especially today is that what kind of ecosystem, what kind of infrastructure, and what kind of data opportunities we can see with the blockchain in the future.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Badri Narayanan Gopalakrishnan, and we have a consulting firm which is into economic modeling and data analytics, infinite sum modeling. And I've been working with several blockchain startups on advising them on business strategy and policy, and also on policy impact. So here I'll be talking about a few cases on policy. How can blockchain be useful for development and policy, economic policy and public policy in general. Yeah, thank you.
Hey guys, I'm Brian Rodgers. I am the head of product for a company called Augmate. We're an IoT blockchain company. I'm also the co-founder and chairman of Columbia University's Blockchain Alliance. We are the first and largest group for blockchain at Columbia University. We're about organizing kind of thought around research in blockchain. We work primarily with the community, alumni, and faculty. So I'll pass it on.
So hi, my name is Jorden Woods, and I'm with both StarChain Ventures. We're a blockchain and ICO investor. Plus, I'm with Double Nova Group, and we're a blockchain advisory. And we see a lot of different use cases. We're very much in both of my hats. We're focused on enterprise, so enterprise blockchain, and also foundational protocols. So I'll be speaking about some of those. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Looks like this is a pretty tough crowd after lunch, so I hope we don't have to shout too much. We are a good-looking bunch, so hopefully that gets you guys interested. My name is Omar Darwazah. I run an early-stage venture fund, $25 million, seed and Series A focused. Our entire investor base is from the Middle East, 65 family offices from Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi, et cetera, et cetera. We're sector agnostic, but we invest across all different sectors, but we're stage focused, seed and Series A. We have a few blockchain planes in our portfolio today. We were pretty early investors in Lightyear, which is the for-profit arm of the Stellar Core, and have an investment in Block Apps, which I'm sure some of you guys know, SDK tools for developers on top of Ethereum. And we're here looking for more investments.
Awesome. I'm Mike. I'm the co-founder of Hydrogen. Hydrogen is building the financial Web 3.0. What that means, very simply, is we have a global platform of APIs that allow you to build, deploy, and run financial applications in over 100 countries. I also run our blockchain platform called Hydro. What this allows you to do is very simply decentralize those financial applications. So we've built a authentication protocol identity protocol. We'll have a document protocol, machine learning, as well as payments. And you'll be able to hit one API and be able to add all these things to any financial app. And that's 100% free and open source there. So what I think we plan to do is just each talk for a few minutes about the topic, which is where we see blockchain over the next decade. So who wants to kick it off, talking a few minutes about generally the topic and where they see the market going and what their perspective is from their company?
So like I mentioned, we're very much focused on enterprise, and we see a lot in supply chain. So we're quite interested in the supply chain use cases. But underlying all of the different enterprise use cases, what we see is, and Mike mentioned, identity. So identity is very important both for the enterprise, it's very important for public, but we also see it as being very important for pretty much anything. So if you're looking at Internet of Things, you really need identity for those things. So it's not just identity for people. We also think that there needs to be identity for bots. And so if you're looking at AI and looking at different bots that are within the ecosystem, we think that another very interesting use case is going to be AI for bots. So really it's going to be identity for pretty much anything that's connecting. Because if you look at it now, most people don't even have identity. The bots don't have identity. And definitely the things don't have identity. But all of these different elements are going to need to be identified if you're going to actually build a trust layer. So that's what we see as very foundational, is identity. And then on top of that, some very important use cases are going to be supply chain and logistics. And we see a couple different areas there. One is supply chain for things that are not perishable. So if you're looking at parts of products and things like this. But then there are other kinds of things that are perishable. That could be food, it could be medicine, for example. And so there's actually different kinds of supply chains and different kinds of technologies that you need. And so we're looking at companies in each area. Another major one is healthcare. So healthcare, and I'll just really stick with these two, is supply chain and healthcare. And we see combination with identity that you can have some pretty major disruption in healthcare. If you look at the 4 Ps of healthcare, so there's going to be the pharma and the payers. So these are the insurance companies. We see that those two are really going to be the early adopters, and then the providers and the patients will come next. So I'll just leave it there. Who else would like to follow up?
I think I echoed Jordan's comments. I think supply chain and healthcare are going to see a lot of use cases. In general, I'm actually pretty excited about the social impact that blockchain is going to bring to the world. One, I think everybody wants to own their data again. Two, I think all the large tech companies that happen to be here in San Francisco or the Bay Area control too much of the traffic on the internet, right? So blockchain is a way to de-silo a lot of that information from the Googles, the Apples, and the Facebooks of the world. Quite frankly, marketers should pay consumers to be able to get our information on what sort of ads we'd like to see, not the other way around. Today, we are very happily giving away all our information to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so on and so forth. They're using that, packaging that information, targeting ads, and making a killing, right? So blockchain, ironically, is going to disrupt the way the internet is run. I'm an investor in a company called Blockstack that really is trying to reimagine the new internet, where everything is decentralized, including ownership of data. Secondly, I think what's exciting about blockchain, and more so crypto as well, is the fractionalization of assets. And this is also going to segue into the democratization of capital. So today, someone who can't afford to buy 1 share of a stock in a company in the US might now, through tokenization and through blockchain, be able to own a fraction of a fraction. So even if you make $1,000 a month or are in an impoverished country around the world, you'll be able, as blockchain technology shows up on your doorstep, to be able to access capital a lot better, to own a fraction of assets, and to ultimately also down the line issue tokens on illiquid assets that can now, be traded. But from a VC perspective, I think we're very excited about healthcare. We're big healthcare investors. I think there's a lot that can be done with HIPAA-compliant medical records across several organizations. That's a no-brainer for the blockchain. Secondly, I think we've all been seeing the amount of issues happening with E. coli and lettuce, romaine lettuce, or other vegetables around the country. Everybody starts freaking out. Whole Foods is no longer, a safe place to buy product. But with supply chain, as Jorden said, you'll be able to, on the blockchain, you'll be able to go down and trace where and when such issues have occurred and kind of isolate them as much as possible. A third thing that we're excited about as a fund is really the use of blockchain and ultimately, again, utility tokens in cross-border remittance payments. So today, money transfers around the world every day. It's usually very inefficient in the way it transfers. It's very expensive to move money. It takes a very long time. JP Morgan took them 6 days to move $56 billion. But today, with Ripple, you can move big block amounts between financial institutions in seconds. And Lightyear, its cousin, does that for retail investors across borders in multiple currencies. So in fintech, in healthcare, and in supply chain.
So guys, for me, I want to take a little different approach to what I think a lot of us talk about in blockchain. And I want to talk about the convergence of artificial intelligence and the blockchain. So part of my background, too, is I founded the Machine Learning Society in New York a couple years ago. Grew it from 0 people to now about 1,500 people in New York, and the organization now has 8,000. So that combined with my work at Columbia as well, I've got a really interesting front row seat to some of the things that are happening between these two sectors. So I really wanted to talk a little bit about where I see things are happening in the future and where there's going to be a significant opportunity or significant changes in business. So first, a little bit about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence lacks resource. There's a lot of resources required to go into training models. With blockchain, or actually in a decentralized autonomous organization, which is being coined a lot as the kind of the piece that will converge with AI, is lacking decision making. So if you combine artificial intelligence and blockchain, whether it's decentralized autonomous organizations, you've got a very interesting marriage between the two. So I see what's going to start happening is there will be more decision making being done by artificial intelligent agents in a decentralized autonomous organization. So what this means is you can start having organizations that could be run by AI and not humans anymore. It seems a little bit radical, but there are organizations that are right now that are already starting to play around with this decentralized way of artificial intelligence. So Google has this Google federated learning that they've started to work on, which is taking the processing of artificial intelligence off the cloud and moving them to more device-centric. So you have more availability and you're crowdsourcing, in a sense, the training of artificial intelligence. So you'll greatly accelerate the movement of artificial intelligence, and you're going to greatly accelerate the use of these decentralized autonomous organizations. And I'll give you one example of something that's happening right now in Berlin. So in Berlin, there's a company called TerraZero. TerraZero is a company or a group that believes that they can have a self-organizing or autonomous forest. So through artificial intelligence and a decentralized autonomous organization, they'll deploy, the AI deploys drones and other different types of AI or like computer vision, natural language processing and so forth to monitor the forest and determine when there's demand for deforestation, like getting lumber on the forest, taking care of the forest. And where this is really going, I see, is in the future, it's quite possible that the people that could lose their jobs are CEOs. not just the individual workers, because in the long run, I think that through AI and these decentralized autonomous organizations, particularly as we get closer to artificial general intelligence, which means computers have more of a sentient type of way of thinking, it's very possible that organizations could be really fine-tuned, and you could reach a ROI much quicker using algorithms or this AI. So I won't go too much further. It's a kind of deep stuff, but it's something to keep on the radar, and I think that this is probably one of the biggest things you'll start seeing happen in blockchain in the future.
So I'll be talking more about the policy aspects of it. How can blockchain be helpful for policy, which I think some of us already touched upon. The first thing is about identification, of course. So once you have a very clear platform for identity for all the citizens, then all the subsidies and the government programs, the income transfers and so on, become easier. And in countries like India, they already are beginning this kind of process. Of course, it's a long way to before they start using blockchain, but I think that's where the future lies from the public policy for economic development and so on. So their identity is very important. The second thing is food safety, which is again something we touched upon on supply chain. We can trace the origin of food products that we consume and so on. That's already there. And in this context, I've been working with an international organization for vegetables and based in Africa. They are planning to develop a blockchain platform for both for the consumers and for the suppliers. So there are some efforts being taken by the public sector as well in this area. And another area is energy markets, where particularly renewable energy, where maybe in states like Texas here, people can have grids, solar cell grids in their homes, and solar cells in the homes, and the grids can be connected. They can connect all the homes with the central grid, and this combination of AI and blockchain can be used to optimize the design of the transmission capacity of the grid and so on. So that is something that there are some people in Texas, they are already working on. I've been contributing to that. So I think that's another major area. Renewable energy can get a big boost coming from blockchain. Another area is somewhat tied with the other aspect of identification, is about the welfare of indigenous tribes and small island countries, so poor people there and so on. So they can be, so they have a lot of resources, in physical, natural resources, but they don't have kind of monetary resources. And there is I've met somebody here from Sovereign Union, which is working on this kind of aspects, how to use blockchain technologies to, to work for the development of these excluded communities, in a sense. And there are other aspects, like I work a lot on trade issues, international trade, and this is an area in which blockchain has a potential to bring in a major change. For example, when countries trade with each other, when there are exports and imports happening, there are preferences given by certain countries to certain other countries. These are called free trade agreements. And many times, particularly the poor countries, the exporters from poor countries, they're not able to make use of the preferences because they cannot show that their product was manufactured in that particular country. So here, once you have a clear blockchain system which can trace the origin of the products. So if you take a car, for example, how many components of the car came from which country? Then it makes a lot easier for trade regulations to be implemented, and this can benefit particularly the developing countries a lot. And and small players in even in the developed countries a lot. So that's another major thing I want to mention. I think I'll probably talk about more later, but
so I'll make 3 quick points, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of these topics. I think number one, the way we view it is, if this is the Web 3.0. If you look at the Web 2.0 and 1.0, people used to slap .com on the end of their name, and their valuations went up. Now you don't think, oh, .com. If you don't have a .com, you're not in business anymore. We view the same thing about blockchain. 10 years from now, we won't have blockchain conferences. If you don't have a blockchain, you don't have a business. So that's my first thing. My second point is private blockchain, or whatever that bastardized term is now. If that doesn't go away within the next 3 to 5 years, we also won't have blockchain conferences, because that isn't blockchain. So that's my second point. Public blockchain over private blockchain, or the real blockchain over the faux blockchain. And number 3, a lot of things that we stress is building not on top of the blockchain, but with the blockchain. So if we're not using products in our daily lives that just have blockchain embedded in them, because they just make it faster, they make it cheaper, they make it more secure. For instance, we have a 2FA app that will be in the App Store next week, built on top of our authentication protocol. We mentioned the word blockchain once in the entire application. Just one time it says we're doing something on the blockchain. We just think it's a better app. So as long as we keep talking about this blockchain protocol, this, that, and the other, consumers don't give a crap about any of this stuff. They just want stuff that works better. So that's really what we see as the big 3 trends. We'll have you talking. And I also wanted to pose a question after we all had a chance about what everyone thinks. We talked about identity and some other things. What are some of the pros and cons of privatizing that, GDPR, and some of the big questions that are coming up in a lot of our conversations, and how do we see that going forward? But I'll let you finish up on the topic.
Yeah, couple of comments, and I think that they are a little bit the same that were mentioned already. Like Omar mentioned, for example, about private data, how people and companies can own their own data. And it's something that I believe very strongly. And actually, for example, our latest company is a company that basically offers solutions how people can own their own finance data and basically use their own data when they go to wealth management or lending or other finance services. So, and it's linked also to AI, so that I see that in the future people can have personal AI, so that it is not anymore so like at the moment that Amazon is collecting all your data and basically make recommendations what you should buy, but basically you can have your own data, your own AI that helps you to find what you need and for the best price. And another component I want to mention is that how finance is integrated to many other services. Actually, somebody said to me a few weeks ago that the West is monetizing internet by using advertising model, and the East is monetizing internet by using fintech. And it has actually very important point that, for example, all kinds of micropayment solutions, how to transfer money, how to use mobile payments, mobile kind of finance and banking services, they are actually much more common at the moment in Asia. And of course, I think that China is the leading fintech country at the moment, but it's happening also in many other markets there. So that in that way, I see that the finance is coming more integrated component to many other services, because in many cases it is so that people are not really interested to use finance services. Finance is actually only one tool what you need to do something else. If you buy apartment, you need loan. If you must buy something, you must make the payment and so on. And I see that this kind of distributed, integrated finance is coming to all services.
So I think that was a good background. I think we have about 5 or 10 minutes left. So I think it's really interesting. Maybe everyone can give like 20 or 30 seconds. How do we get these things standardized? So we talked about privacy, identity, healthcare, AI. How do we standardize these apps and protocols? Because as we all know, if they're not standardized and every country has their own blockchain and every healthcare company has their own, it won't work. So what are your thoughts and how are you helping companies to do that?
Actually, can I just jump in real quick? So about private and public blockchains. So I'm a strong believer of the public blockchain as well, but I do think that there's probably room for private also. And the reason why is I think that the biggest problem we're going to be faced with is regulation. It's a dirty word to a lot of us, but it's the reality that we're faced with in society, that we do have regulators. Banks probably will not go to a public blockchain, for instance. They need to have full control over the flow of data, and they need to understand the custody issues, etc. But another one, so the reason why I think for me personally it's important is because with my company, Augmate, the way we work is we provide the layer of trust between the device and the human. So we develop policy that allows corporations to control the policy of how people use those devices. And we're believers of public because the public blockchain, we will actually interface with the public for the machine-to-machine. But when it comes to managing the devices and the companies want to use the private blockchain. And they see this as a very positive thing because with a private blockchain, you still have the decentralized functionality. So let's say you have a health system, for instance, and you've got a very expensive piece of equipment that's being shared across different hospitals. Each of those hospitals, not one of those hospitals will be dictating the policy on that device. All hospitals will be agreeing to the policy of that device as it moves from hospital to hospital. But these hospitals don't want to have a public consensus. They'd rather have the consensus controlled by key stakeholders in each of the enterprise hospitals. So that's it.
Yeah, what we tend to talk about is I think private blockchain gives the sense of something like an intranet. And so I don't think that the word private is actually being used. It's more permissioned, right? So the idea is that you need permission to be able to access that particular blockchain, or you need permission to be a node, and that's not going to go away ever, because businesses do not want transparency to their information, and they don't want some anonymous group of people at the node set. So in the enterprise, you will always have permissioned, but it probably will go to permission public, right? So they're going to be using a public blockchain, but they're going to be permissioned on it. Right now, you're going to have sets, like if you're working with IBM Hyperledger, for example, you'll have subchannels or channels within it where that is, in essence, like a private, but is fully permissioned. And the reason that private is a bit of a misnomer is private gives the sense that there's just one party involved. And if you're dealing with decentralization, you're dealing with consortiums, you're dealing with anything with blockchain, if you have one party, you're not going to actually get any benefit, right? Blockchain has to have multiple parties involved in order to have any value. But those parties, if they're trusted parties, you get quite a few benefits. One is you can have much higher transaction throughput, right? I mean, even look at EOS, right? EOS is a public blockchain, but their block producers are delegated. They have DPoS, and so they're able to get much higher throughput because they don't have to worry so much about malicious or bad actors on the chain, right? So if you go and you look at something like Bitcoin, where everybody is anonymous, you have to do proof of work because you don't know anybody, and you could have tremendous number of malicious actors. So you will have different spheres, and you're going to have permissioned and permissionless, and that's not going to go away. But they're probably going to be on more of a public blockchain core, but that's not going to happen for at least 3 years. So there's going to be a transition phase, and there are going to be a lot of these platforms, and we'd like to talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, and I want to get back to the question you asked about standardization. I think is a really important point. And yesterday there was a conversation about how these blockchain protocols or protocols will evolve. and how there's space for a lot of different protocols that will come about. For me, again, when I look at the IoT space, not all protocols are really the right way to use an IoT. There's some protocols right now that are much better of a use or better of a standard than others. So, I think that we look at the internet right now as looking at standardization of how messaging works, but I think blockchain brings in a lot more complexity around protocols than just a messaging standard. So I think that, for me personally, I think that it will continue to evolve, and there will be standardization in certain sectors, but standardization as a whole in blockchain, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. Getting back to our statements about what do we think is going to happen to the term blockchain? I think it's quite likely that in a few years from now, or probably in a couple of years, we may not really be talking about blockchain. We'll be talking about in a different sense. And once this becomes more mainstream, I think that the people that will change the term blockchain, because really, in reality, blockchain is a pretty geeky thing. It's like saying database. My company has a database. And right now we kind of laugh and say, well, that's silly. I think in a few years we'll say the same thing, and the people that will probably change this will be the people in marketing and advertising, come up with more sexier statements that will represent what blockchain is to society. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with what you're saying. I think in the next few years, we're going to see certain protocols have very, very specific use case in certain areas, and then they're going to nail that. And then you're going to have a ton that are going to die. Again, talking about the whole ICO market overheating and a ton of these protocols or coins kind of dying out. And, back to your point about saying blockchain is the database, when I think of blockchain and, the Internet 3.0, it's as if, we're getting so excited about HTML for the first time in the 90s, right? It's going to be that basic in the Internet's DNA that we're going to look back and sort of laugh about it. But we need to go through this sort of phase where, from a very, very specific use case perspective, you have certain protocols nailing certain areas, others dying out, and others becoming a standard for that space. But to have a standard sort of protocol for the whole world is probably not going to be the case. But again, if we end up finding certain companies silo data way too much, today, for example, too much of the traffic is controlled by the United States. And hence, everybody cares about what the regulatory bodies in the United States say, as opposed to regulatory bodies in, let's say, Malta or Belize or some of these other countries around the world that are really trying to get a lot of the crypto and blockchain sort of activity. But if that in fact gets disrupted, then we might have several different standards. Or the United States, again, might come in and reign as the leader in, hey, this is the new sort of internet that we're trying to develop. Let's have the whole world jump on that bandwagon.
Yeah.
Right.
What I'd follow up on that is, history does repeat itself. And, I think it's kind of amusing when you look back in history how other technology or other protocols were introduced to society. And if you look at, for instance, electricity, believe it or not, there were vice presidents of electricity for businesses. And, today we're like, really? Vice president of electricity? And there are vice presidents of blockchain now, and so in the not too distant future, I think we'll all kind of laugh and say, how would there be a blockchain leader? It makes no sense. It's blockchain, all it is, it's just it's a database or it's a protocol. It's not really kind of like a thing the way we know it as. So
I think a lot of what we're talking about is education, right? Educating people within the industry, people in the governments, banks. It's a big thing we struggle with as well, or a challenge. We're the only public blockchain that's offered in financial services. Hyperledger's our biggest competitor, and we have to educate banks and governments and companies that, look, if you're not adopting a decentralized, not permissioned or semi-permissioned blockchain, you won't be in business. It's not going to happen 2 years from now, but maybe 10 or 20 years from now, you just won't have a business, because we'll empower 1 billion other small startups, neobanks, disruptive fintechs around the world to just overtake you. And there's not any regulation you can put in place to stop 5 billion people that now have mobile phones from wanting technology. You can't stop that. That's a revolution. And there's no government or no regulation that could stop that. So I think it's just a matter of education for all of our companies and trying to standardize things as much as possible.
Yeah, so I think what we're basically saying is that the use cases are pretty much across the board, right? It's not like it's only fintech or it's only supply chain or it only has to do with some particular areas for the consumer. Really, blockchain is going to be for all sectors, but there's something fundamentally different about it which will disrupt what we think is normal now. And actually, because of the decentralization and the fact that the community is such a large part of the fabric of a blockchain company. I mean, look at Ethereum or look at Bitcoin, for example. Just recently not declared a security because there's no entity of any, anything that controls either of those at any specific level, right? Ethereum Foundation has less than 1%. And Satoshi Nakamoto, nobody even knows who he is or who she is or who they are. So the company structure is going to get completely changed. We have a lot of big companies, we have governments, we have banks, we have large institutions that we trust. The main protocols that will become important, and they depend a lot on identity, is the internet lacks a trust layer. It lacks an identity layer. And so those areas are something that blockchain can provide. And so these protocols, in terms of how identity is developed, how trust is actually mediated, you're going to have a trustless system of smart contracts, and that's going to fundamentally change how trust is mediated throughout the human world and also the machine world, right? So this is something that is fundamentally what we don't have. I mean, the big issue that everyone had with Facebook is we were supposed to be able to trust Facebook with our identity information, with our personal information. But the question that I have is, why did they have our information in the first place? Excuse me. And so really that information belongs to us, as we've all talked about, but there's no protocol, right, in the internet until now for creating that level of trust. So that's probably the most fundamental use case. But then companies, because you don't need these large intermediaries, you don't need governments for attestation, can become very small. If you look at most ICO companies today, they don't have jurisdiction really. They can be in multiple countries. Look at any of them. They're in 5, 6, 10 different countries, right? They don't have boundaries. And they actually are looking at being global from birth, not just in their team, but their business models are global from birth. So they don't really look at jurisdiction as being important. They don't look at having a large company as being important. The community will be the company, and the community is something that you need to be able to adopt, and they need to adopt you. So it's something fundamentally different. It's not about likes, it's about the community actually running your business. So these are some very fundamental changes, and so when we talk about use cases, I think we actually need to look at a very different future for our companies and our governments.
So I just wanted to second the idea that Mike mentioned about education. So I think educating the potential clients and the policymakers and businesses, so that's the most important part of all of these use cases. You need education, and education is through a clear explanation of facts, but also analytics and a lot of data intensive validation of how this particular technology is going to change in how things are going to work, like fundamental changes that we are discussing. So I think that quantification using real data is essential, is important to take the use cases forward. And the second element here is also collaboration with academic institutions in terms of doing this kind of research projects, both in the technology space and in the strategy and analytics space is I think very important in this context. So yeah, that's something I want to mention.
Yeah, I think that the question was about standards. I don't believe that there will be one standard. I think that the development is too fast. I have sometimes compared what is happening in finance to telecom. Telecom industry used to make a lot of standards, but it used to take 10 years to get a new standard. And then what has happened with internet, it's really de facto standards. And I think that the regulation and, for example, what kind of data is collected by regulators and that kind of things, it is another story. But if we talk about the technology, I don't think that there will be a kind of central standard.
So guys, sadly, I think our time is coming up. We're going to have to say farewell, but I wanted a chance for people to ask some questions if there's any questions out here.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for your wonderful panel discussion. I'm Rebecca. My question will be about medical care. Do you think blockchain technology will solve the problem of the quality of electric medical records, EMR issues? Thank you.
So I think the fact EMR is a big problem. The EMR system is a problem now because it's very siloed. You have a lot of different organizations and they cannot communicate with each other. And there's some fundamental issues, right, of getting information out. So if you look at first responders or you look at people in emergency rooms, when you come into an emergency room, if a person is unconscious, it's very difficult for people to actually get information about that person and then know what their conditions are, what their allergies are, what their genetics are, and actually treat them well. And a lot of people die because of lack of information, even though we have electronic health records. So it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. But that information does need to get liberated, and it can get liberated via blockchain, where we actually have a copy of our own medical records, our personal health record, or PHR. And so when we are admitted, our PHR can be scanned, or we can unlock it with a private key or something like this, and give access to our health records. So you're going to have still on a permission blockchain, really the actual EMRs themselves, but it will get that data that is actually ours. And there's many different locations. So you think about it, there's going to be your doctor's offices, there's going to be healthcare, like hospitals are going to have information about you, there's pharmacies that have information about you, there's labs that have information about you, there's your baby doctor, there's specialists, insurance companies. So it's distributed right now, but we need to make it decentralized, right, where it's actually on a chain. And that could be multiple chains if you get interconnectivity, right? That's another problem that needs to be solved, is chain-to-chain, interoperability. But if we can liberate that data to the individual, if I'm admitted to a hospital in an emergency situation and I can't speak or I'm unconscious, that information can get scanned, and there's my entire health record, all the different aspects of it. And there's a lot that can then happen in terms of revolutionizing healthcare. But yes, blockchain can do this. My colleague Radhika, who's sitting over there, and I have written papers on this. And so we'd be happy to provide you a link to our paper. And we actually speak about this topic extensively, much more than we can talk about here.
Actually, I'll add a bit more to that as well. I think today, at least from our perspective as a VC, we found that blockchain as a technology is the only way to have cross-sharing of data, medical data, that is HIPAA compliant, right? So in the medical world, things need to be HIPAA compliant so that they actually adhere to the standards set here in the United States. And as Jorden was saying, the situation whereby you have an unconscious patient come in, what do you do there? How do you extract information without having to be non-compliant, right? So the great thing about blockchain is that it's able to do so. Actually, one of the smartest analogies for that, and really, and this can be applied to a lot of other situations, is if you are going to a bar and you need to show proof of your age. When a bouncer looks at your ID, they see way too much superfluous information. They see where you live, they see your eye color, your height, they see your age, whether you're a donor or not, et cetera, et cetera. In the modern decentralized world where blockchain plays a role, you should be able to scan some sort of digital identity, and that person says, hey, I verified you as X, Y, and Z person, and you are above the age of 21, please go ahead and have a drink. But I don't need to know where you live and then cause some stress for me about worrying, oh, this person knows where I live, they might come after me, blah, 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 right? So this is sort of an analogy that can be really applied to EMR records, and we're seeing this as pretty revolutionary, right?
So just one last thing on that point. So that's zero knowledge proof and selective disclosure, and that's very big for regulated industries, especially healthcare.
So I have a question about blockchain and the paradoxes of it, right? So you have a public database, but you also have something that could be hacked. You could, and also cryptocurrency, right? You have decentralization, and yet you have regulation. You have community, and yet you have investors that, of course, want to make money. How do you think the community or as a CEO should balance that, or think about all the nuances and all the paradoxes in the space?
So I'll answer because I started a blockchain company from scratch. We did no ICO, no token sale. We bootstrapped. We have about 10,000 developers on our platform. So for me, it's about building awesome products. It's like any other tech company. You build awesome products, get people to use them, you growth hack, you scale. You could build $1 billion company, build $1 billion blockchain, whatever you want to say. If you don't focus on the product and you're focused on raising capital all the time, writing white papers, business plans, or whatever they are these days, you're not going to go anywhere. So that's really what I would say is focus on the product. In terms of the paradoxes, I think blockchain isn't as hacker friendly as you think. It's very, very hard to hack into a public blockchain. So that's why we use a public blockchain and not a private one. Actually, a private one's much, for us, less secure and much easier to hack into.
Yeah, and maybe an investor perspective on that as well is, if you worked with a good team, everything can happen very quickly, and there's fewer mistakes. So really a lot of people don't focus enough when they're building their companies on building the company with the best team possible. And, a lot of people just build companies with their friends or people that they meet casually, and that's easy to do, but that's not necessarily building a good company. Because when you have the best people, you can actually trust everyone around you, and they have good skill sets, and so when they accomplish things, they don't need to be redone, by other people. And so that foundation allows you to execute, and also because it's a good team, they're going to be very aware of all the key things that you need to do, like building good product, working with the community, and they'll be able to find other good people like themselves in order to scale out your team. I built my first company and I didn't focus enough on good team, and you run into a lot of problems. But now when I build companies, I focus on team first and get the best people, and you have far fewer problems, and everything else kind of takes care of itself.
So guys, if that's it, thank you so much for coming and hearing us, and we'll see you soon.